Welcome back to The Nature of Natural, a new podcast featuring some of the ways the masters use behavioral science principles to achieve some great results. I'm Julianne Neal, your host for today's episode, and I'm so excited to sit down once again with Tim McGaffic, longtime horseman, clinician, and student of the horse. Tim's background and experience with horsemanship, stockmanship, and stock dogs led him to the philosophy behind the nature of natural. We also have a really special opportunity today. We're going to introduce another member of the Nature of Natural team, Ginny Elder. A lifelong advocate for the horse, Ginny has a background in teaching, public speaking, and writing, as well as classical training with some of the best horsemen of our time. Tim and Ginny, thank you both for sitting down with me again to talk about this work and the nature of natural.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, in the first episode, in our inaugural episode of the podcast, we talked about your background a little bit already in this field, as well as your film project with John St. Ryan, Get the Mind and the Feet Will Follow. And I love that title. Today, we've promised to dive a little bit more into that film project, and we're going to talk about that. But first, could we talk a little bit about how you and Ginny met and collaborated to create the Nature of Natural? Tim, tell us a little bit about that.
I met Ginny many years ago when she and her husband owned a large guest ranch, and I was training horses, and she had a horse that she wanted started, I think, if I recall, and they came and I met them, and they approved of my method, and so they let me start their horse, and that's how I met them, and we became friends, and over time we just stayed friends, and she consequently, they had sold their guest ranch, and so she moved on to just being a horse woman and in other places. So, but in the meantime, I had started doing more clinics and riding with performance horse trainers, and followed some of the classical masters and asked those questions about what was the commonality of all these things. And when I read the first book that Andrew McLean wrote, it struck me that was that was the common thing that all these people did successfully, even though they probably didn't know the science or behavioral behind it. They used it from many years of observation, if not sometimes thousand. So I wrote it was a whole thing for my clinics. It was called, and I wanted to call it something that, because there was, and I guess it's still out there to a large degree, what they call natural horsemanship. And I was thinking, well, just because you have a rope halter and you pull on it a certain way doesn't actually mean it's natural, right? So I came up with the term, the nature of natural. And these things were embedded in learning theory, and those innate tendencies of all these different species. And that was natural. So that occurred in nature through natural selection and other things. And so that was the first thing I wrote, and it was pretty long. I used it for clinics, so there was lots of diagrams and stuff in it. And of course, Ginny saw it at one point or I don't recall when. And she thought it was a pretty good idea, I guess. You'll have to ask her.
I will. Yes, I will. Well, it's funny as I get to know the two of you a little bit better. I love the dynamic between you, and Jenny's almost like your translator sometimes. And maybe that's not the right word, but Jenny, I want to go back to. It sounds to me as though you've taught literally over 1,000 people to ride because of your background, and education is certainly a passion for you. So, can you talk a little bit about from your side of this, how you got to know Tim and how you feel that you fit into this nature of natural team? How did that work for you?
Well, we do have a pretty good working relationship. First of all, I get a real kick out of Tim. He makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And we always have a really good time doing events and clinics and working with people and having these esoteric conversations about horses, the horse world, what is it all about, Alfie, that kind of thing. So we had that from the beginning. And, I really can't remember. I believe I first saw Tim at a Brian Newbert clinic in Ignacio, Colorado. And I also remember that somewhere along the line, I took a clinic with him at Patty Temple's place. And then I also remember Tim called me and he said, "Can I come over and have a lesson so you could explain this shoulder in business to me?" And he did. And, so we've always gotten along really, really well. A lot of good common ideas. My background, I hit the earth purposefully with horses. My parents have no idea where this came from, but it just happened. I'm one of those weird people who just hit the ground loving horses. And horse advocacy and humane treatment is something I'm all about. I was lucky enough to get a job on this big guest ranch, and I was lucky enough to become the first woman head wrangler. And I was left to my own devices with over 150 horses that I took care of day in, day out. So those horses actually were kind of like the trigger between what Tim had written about the nature of natural. And I always like to think of that as these are principles of nature. And all this stuff that Tim wrote, that herd of horses had taught me. I didn't know they were teaching me, but they taught me everything that we talk about today. Those horses taught me by trial and error learning. I know who was teaching who in that instant. It was the horses. So at the ranch, I 38 years, had 80 guests a week. I was in charge of the lesson programs, and somewhere along the line I went from Western and roping and barrel racing and met an English lady who said, "Come over and take a jumping lesson." 3 weeks later, I'm in the hunter jumper business. Then I'm in the eventing world. And then, fortunately, I met Charles Tecumseh, who became a close friend and my mentor. And a bit like Tim, except I was in more of the English world because I'd never done that. Like Tim, though, I went and studied with the best of the best. I traveled internationally to go and educate myself. Continue to do that to this day. You can never stop learning, and somewhere along the line, Tim and I started teaching and producing events, and it's just been great. And I hope we've helped a few horses and a few people along the way. That's for sure. Yeah,
sure you have.
It's been fun.
Yes. Well, it's so funny because when I hear somebody talk about their history and background in ranching and all of the things that you were doing Western, and then you bring in a name like Charles Tecumseh, that's sort of, wait a minute, I got to hear more about this. And then you talk about old masters. Tim is always speaking about the masters of horsemanship. And so, when I think of what Tim is saying, it's Tom Dorrance and them. But, the way you all are bringing it together, it's very exciting. And so, we mentioned the website in our last episode. And so I think you've had a lot to do with putting the website together and that sort of thing. Is that right?
That's correct. That's my job. It's part of my, what I do or where I can contribute. I think the most right now is putting things out, writing, editing, doing, the little blurbs out on Facebook. I would say it was a real pleasure making that website, but as you know, it is difficult and to do something like that. And and to make it appealing. There's all kind of, I think right now there's a tsunami of information that is literally drowning out correct classical, the nature of natural type learning principles and training. There's too many gurus of the month, as Charles de Comfy would say. And a lot of people don't have the opportunity to be raised with stock or animals. You know, they have one horse, they rely on one trainer, and it saddens me to see some of the, say, the malarkey that goes on, you know, out there. So when you meet a person, you know, like Tim, John St. Ryan was a close friend of ours, of mine, Tom Dorrance, it all kind of comes back down. And Tim always talks about this connecting the dots. That's what we're trying to do. You connect the dots. Why does it work? Why does Gustav and de Comfy and Codis, it works? It works for Tom Dorrance and Ray Hunt and Tim McGaffic because they're principles of Mother Nature. They're principles that hold true. It's not a methodology. They're principles, you know, based in behavioral science. And if you go back and you read some of these masters, and you read some of Tom Dorrance, and then you overlay my experience, what the horses were telling me, it's the truth. It's how it works. And horses would be a lot better off from a humane and ethical standpoint if people could learn about the nature of natural, to learn about equitation science, and then, you know, specialize in whoever methodology they want.
Exactly. And the fact that you guys are putting together this library of videos and bringing people together of a like mindset, that's so important right now in this time in society. And so, Tim, I'll bring it back to you, because we talked in our first episode about all of your background in the field, but especially we said we're going to get back to this film project. And I think it's so interesting. Of course, Jenny, you were involved in that too. But I think the fascinating thing is that with John St. Ryan and everything else that you all brought together with so many incredible trainers and horsemen, you all found each other, and we were able to learn from you and from your collaboration. So, Tim, let's talk a little bit more about the film. And I know somewhere in there you've got a story or two about John and different things that happened with filming. So that's what I'm interested in hearing about today. So deep dive into the film project. How, you know, tell me something.
Well, it started out, I rescued this Mustang Tank, which is the horse in the film. And he was, I say I rescued him, I bought him because he was he had like 5 owners in a time, and I think the last owner was injured somehow. And the National Mustang Association, which I was a member of, they were going to buy him to keep him from going to the local sale barn. That's a small town there, and usually in those small towns there's a big chance of horses going to killer buyers. So when I heard about it, I said, well, I'll buy him, and I'll just work at, you know, this stuff that we're working on. And it was, you know, they didn't, in the first book, first edition of Equitation Science, it doesn't mention combined reinforcement. And on one side, you know, the pure positive people have these ideas that any pressure, or they call it adverse things, really affect, you know, the long-term mental health, I guess, of the horse. But my experience was a little different in that, and in the first Equitation Science book, it advocated that the horses needed to have, you know, understand pressure and release in order to be under more control in case, you know, something came up like some environmental stimulus that triggered their flight responses, and it became dangerous. And then in that way, it put out some statistics that horse riding was more dangerous or as dangerous as motorcycles and playing rugby and all these other things. So it was, and they were saying, you really have to have that. And I didn't disagree with that, but I had these experiences in the past from several horses, but this one called Dusty. And I didn't know it was going to be called combined reinforcement, but I started using pressure and the positive reinforcement, a combination thereof, and started using some of those things to put together like a little process of trying to solve, we'll say they're problems, but they're really, if you take Tom's words, and that's working from the inside out, an emotional perspective, and equitation science calls it a high regard for emotional states, to be able to shift those emotional states to a place of understanding instead of fear and everything. And a lot of those horses, of course, that happened to from past training, some past experiences. So I started that process with Tank, and along the way, it sort of dawned on me. I said, well, all these things that we're doing here, they can be equated to some principle, and specifically, since John and I were both members, and I was friends with John. We were members of the Society for Equitation Science. I said to John, we could easily equate some of these principles with Tom's philosophy. And Tom's philosophy is a lot of times, if not is expressed in little aphorisms, which in the film, Ginny is the voice of Tom, and she gives us the aphorism that we're dealing with. So I can't remember how, I guess I got John to come to Phoenix, and that Mustang was at Ginny's house. And so, and I had kind of just filmed it. I mean, it was just like, do this, do that, kind of thing. And John came and he watched it, or watched me do it with the horse, and he eventually, after we talked about it some, decided this should be made into a film. And of course, John was an actor, a musician, accomplished, he made films, producing and things. So he had that expertise. And so he set it up along with his son, who is another professional. I guess his forte is sound, but he does all these other things as well. And so they came to Ginny's, where there was an arena and so forth. And we wrote a script with, those things, that process, and we made the film. And so that's how the film got made. And that's kind of where we are today. There's another film coming out that specifically has a lot of the aphorisms in there that just equate it to some behavioral principle without, there's no real horse involved there. It's just here's the aphorism and this is what he's talking about, kind of thing. So that should be done in another, I don't know, it's up to Shannon, John's son. He's editing it. So it should be done next month or so. That was his estimate. And when it comes out, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's funny. I'm a former theater director and high school teacher. And so I know when you put an animal or a child on the spot for filming, you cannot always predict what's going to happen. And so it sounds to me like Tank the Mustang was a pretty exceptional horse to use for this. Did he ever have some moments when you were filming that he went off script a little bit himself? I mean, what is his personality like?
Well, he's a genuinely kind of a good guy, right? But he has this, I think it's an innate trigger to so when we say triggers, there's a thing called thresholds. In other words, so if a stimulus shows up, there's sort of a threshold to the next thing. And for horses and things, it's, of course, some version of flight or fight, the flight or fight thing. And his is really, really short in terms of looking at something in environment and whatever. And then he doesn't stay real, like, I'm going to try to figure this out for very long. He just goes right to, I'm leaving, right? And so, we're trying to overlay that with, of course, pressure. In that process, we feel, or John and I feel, and I think Ginny does too, that essentially that process is teaching pressure as sort of a language, of a guide of what to do to solve the problem, as opposed to just pure trial and error. I don't know what to do, blah, blah, blah. But if I follow the pressure, and that's, Tom used to say, follow the feel. And the feel was the pressure. So when you get them to do that and they respond, even when there is some escalating pressure, then you can usually resolve whatever is going on. And
I think that goes back into that trust, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the root of that is trust.
Talk about the trust. Yeah. When we did that film, it was great fun because, we do a lot of videotaping, and Tim and John and I, we worked on that script for a long time before they came the second time. But when they came the second time, I'll never forget the look on Tim's face. It was lights, camera, and action.
Like a deer in the headlights.
Because John and his son Shannon, they're professionals,
Yeah.
And we like I said, we produced a lot of videos before, but not like that. We had the clapboard, and we had a beautiful script girl that would collect.
I love it.
Bring the water, and it was just a lot of fun. But I met John St. Ryan when I'd taken a couple students to his ranch in California. And the minute I met him, and we'd had kind of like just a pen pal conversation. When I met him, the very first night we had dinner together, I said, I have got to introduce you to my friend Tim McGaffic. He's going to become your best friend.
Oh, so I know, I didn't realize that.
Tim had also written John an email prior to that, but I don't know that they connected. But it was just one of those things because Tim's mind and John's mind are inquiring minds.
Yes.
And so it was terrific conversations, and Tim, do you remember when we invited John to Florida to go to that, to Sharon Madeir's place?
Yeah, of course.
It was so much fun. John's eyes were about this big around, seeing the positive reinforcement crowd, but he also, kind of like Tim, kind of like me, always curious about, other things going on.
He sounded like such a special person. Yeah.
He was a character, though. He had a touch of Dennis the Menace, didn't he? Great sense of humor.
Yeah.
So of all of the stars of the film, where is Tank the Mustang now? Where does he live?
Well, I'm here in Crawford, Colorado, and usually had always spent the summers in Colorado. And he's here at my friend's ranch, the Allen Ranch. and I've been working with him. So we're still working on those environmental inputs. You must stay, sort of, and at least try to figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't just conclude that the bird over there is dangerous and take off. So we work at that all the time. And really the question is there, can you overlay that enough? Because that's an innate tendency of his.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so can you delay that threshold enough to stay cognitive? And in a lot of ways we have, but we need to expand upon that, further. And so one of the premises of that film was um, this process, if you use it, it teaches the basics. The basics being, be able to move the body parts independently, so that they understand pressure in that area, their bodies, or whatever. They're not worried. They understand how to step through and so forth. Which then, as Jenny pointed out in her earlier talk, was that you can take now, no matter what you do now, whether you're a dressage rider, a Western rider, or whatever, that's what you do. You're combining those body parts to create some kind of behavior, whether it's pee off or flying lead change, or a rollback, or something like that. It's all the same. Um, and if you thought about it in sports, people play sports. And of course, when you're playing these sports, whether you're playing football or basketball or baseball or soccer, one of these sports, you have to you practice running backwards and sideways and, crossing your legs over and all this different things, because it's a fundamental skill that then you use in whatever sport that is. So the same is
Mm-hmm.
true with the horses, and that's what Ginny was pointing out. Once you understand these things, you can choose methods that the horse understands better. And if the basics are there, you can get there without, well, there's always, setbacks. But here, like, because of the premise of the basics and that anyone can do it, if you followed that
Mm-hmm.
process, you wouldn't even have to hardly be much of a horse person if you just followed that process. You don't have to be some super horse whisperer or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this summer I would introduce Tank to several things, but one was the Garrocha. And John was a champion of the Garrocha. It's an art now. I think he was the national champion 4 times. I have to check that with his family to make sure that's true, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that's right. But the Garrocha, if you use it, and I've used it on starting colts before, not to become a national champion like John, but the Garrocha does a bunch of things because it's a long pole. It's about
Uh-huh.
12 feet long. I mean, I think, there's a size for different horses because they have to go underneath it. So as you put the Garrocha out, they see it, and like, say you're going underneath it in the front, it makes sense to them. There's a block up there, right? So if you were just asking the front end across to take a lead step the way you want without the Garrocha, it's, even though they know, it's like, oh, they try to walk forward or whatever. Well, the Garrocha's there and they step right through, and so it's a way to build on those basics. Plus, at the
Huh.
same time, they have all this tactile information that's coming because the Garrocha is touching them a lot, especially on the rump when they when you go back through, unless he's a really little horse, and you got the Garrocha up here, um, there's all that tactile information. Oh, it's just this thing touching me there. There's a lot of horses, you've seen them. They get touched in the back, and it's like, oh, and Tank was like that in the beginning. You could not touch him past sort of the withers. When you got back there, he's got big arousal, and so that was a long time ago. But then also the Garrocha has the visual effect because it's so long. You're looking at essentially what cowboys call change of eye or laterality in whatever. So, and that's, changing sides of the brain. It's change of eye, but really one eye talks to one side of the brain and the other. So, and you're teaching that helps them too. Okay, that's over here. This is over here. I got it. No problem. And learning, everything learns. And so when you're trying to select things to teach, whether, you were a teacher, so, you select the best things for your students. One of the definitions of learning, and there's quite many, but one is the creation of new neural pathways. And so that, speaking of the brain, the left and the right, that corpus callosum that divides the brain is a membrane. And so that has to, as you start to build, left and right, that increases their ability to switch sides, right? To go from left brain to right brain. So that's the fundamentals behind it. You don't need to know all those things, I suppose. It might be nice. But so we're going to work at a little Garrocha work, and maybe by, the end of the summer or something, we'll be able to make a little film of the basics using the Garrocha.
I'm excited about that because as you're describing all of it, I don't know anything about that. I'm going to be excited to learn more about that process because the work that we're doing here, my partner Bruce Anderson and I, it's when you're talking about the pressure threshold and building all of that and the neural pathways, all of that is the work that we're doing as well. And, I think that's to me why the film is so tough. And why I'm so glad you're continuing to put all of this information out, because it seems to me, and this is just my opinion, but we're polarized with so many thoughts about pressure, no pressure, positive reinforcement, negative, all of that. And so the way you describe all of this really brings things together in a way that, like you said, I think just the general public, Joe Blow horseman, average horseman can understand without having to have a degree in neuroscience, but also without having to be an old master to figure it all out. So it's
well, I want to jump in here because I don't know that you guys follow Facebook as closely as I do, but Tim and I have a friend. Her name is Lori Ward, and she adopted a little wild Mustang who'd had once again a really rough start with people. And she knew John, and she has watched that film, and she has taken everything from that film to train this little Mustang. And she's been videotaping it and putting each session, each lesson with this horse on Facebook.
Nice.
And yesterday, you cannot believe, and she refers back to this, the film. This is what you and Tim taught me, combined reinforcement. And to watch it unfold, she's not a horse trainer. She's a retired small animal veterinarian. But to see it unfold, it's like, it really is jaw-dropping to see how well it works when you build trust.
Yes.
And Tim, you remember all those diagrams you were talking about in the nature of natural? Well, she was doing them yesterday, putting the rope over and doing this and that. And I said, Lori, I've been watching a master class in in how to do it, how to use combined reinforcement. And she very humbly said, well, this is what you and Tim taught me how to do, you and John, in that film, and I just am doing it. And it was the comments on this, she makes it look effortless. It looks so easy. Well, yes, it should be. It's not,
Yes.
you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do this. You've got to think, So that film, that just makes my heart, every day when I go look at these films she posts, it just makes my heart happy to see that it is going to make a difference. It is making a difference.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Well, I was going to ask
Well, I
how
might
the
want
film
to
has
say
been
one
received.
thing here
Yeah.
to add to Ginny's thing.
Sure.
I mentioned in the first equitation science book, it didn't mention combined reinforcement. In the second edition, it does. And it not only mentions it, it says that they feel through research that it is the most effective way to train a horse. And so as you teach them that, you build trust. So Jenny brought that up. And once they trust you, and if they do trust you universally, and they probably, not even sure Tank trusts me universally, but for a whole lot of things he does. But we keep working on that. But once they do, you can probably do most anything to them because they don't think you're going to hurt them.
Right.
And they go, okay,
Right.
we'll try that.
Yeah, we'll give it a try.
Right.
That's exactly right. And I'll just say again, I'm thrilled that the film is received that way because you're putting out the opportunity for people to have this knowledge, but then they have to take it and build the wisdom from what they do with it. And so it sounds to me like that's exactly what she's doing. And you've provided an amazing opportunity with people. So you have a couple of pretty big events coming up where you'll be sharing the film and the work. And you guys are traveling next week to Grand Junction, I believe, and you're both going to be there. Tim, you'll be a Mustanger, and y'all tell me about the setup. What are you planning for all of that?
Well, we'll have we're going to have a booth there with some videos playing, the philosophy sort of available. If, when I'm not doing the thing with the demo with the horse, then I'll be there to answer questions. Ginny will be there. And as you can see, she knows all this stuff, so she can answer all the questions too. As far as the demo goes, I guess, I was at the film festival in Albuquerque, and the Mustangers were working their horses. And I guess the format is pretty much the same or very similar. And so I think we'll be talking about trust, the approach, working from the inside out. So we'll be doing things, and then I'll try to explain it. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if we have an hour each or whatever, but say if we have an hour, I might work the horse for 30 or 40 minutes, and maybe even shorter, depending on the horse and how it goes. And then, talk or answer questions. And there might be some written materials there as handouts that cover some of these things, whatever. So that's what we'll do. And, we'll express the philosophy as we go through and tell why we choose a certain method at that time, because we're going to try to interpret those emotional states to work from the inside out. And through that process, build trust and cognition and learning, and say what we think is going on. And, since we're not a horse, it'll be, our opinion, I suppose, but there'll be certain indications that we know indicate certain, states, arousal, states. So we'll look at
Right,
that,
right.
and hopefully people will come and talk to us at the booth and see about maybe watching the film and having, adopting some of these methods. We would love to help them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
put on a clinic or a lecture or something somewhere. So that's what we'll be doing.
Well, I think that's fabulous. And you mentioned the word adopt, and where you were talking about adopting the methods, but this is also an adoption event. And so the horses that the Mustangers work with will be available. I think the very cool thing about this Grand Junction event, and there are other ones that happen across the country, but the fact that you'll be able to showcase what you do with a yearling Mustang, or I think they're going to be yearlings, but then people who want to see it hands-on can come and watch you do that, and then have the opportunity to actually speak with you in person at the booth and see the film. And with everything, that's going to be a great way for people to learn a little bit more. So if somebody's not in Colorado and can't come to Grand Junction or whatever, they can still see the film through your website, right?
Tim?
Yeah, well,
John's.
from John's website, because John, we just direct things towards his website. The websites are connected.
Good.
So they can get the film from John St. Ryan's website, and we'll probably have clips and things from the film to show. Plus, I believe, well, I haven't heard back if we have permission yet to film the sessions, but we're planning on filming those sessions, and then in case people wanted to see one of those sessions with the yearlings in a sequential way, then we'll be able to hopefully show that at the booth too. So that's our plan. And as you know, all plans don't fold out the way you think. But we'll adjust. However it goes, we'll do our best, and we look forward to seeing everybody, and hopefully the horses all get adopted to good homes.
Well, I hope so too. I really do. They just had an event out in California, and every one of the Mustangs were adopted, and so I feel sure with this one it will be the same. And so by the time I speak to both of you next, it will already be a past event, and I can't wait to hear how it goes. And so is there anything else either one of you would like to talk about on this podcast, or you want to save all your knowledge for the next one?
Guess we'll talk to you again soon.
Very good. Well, Ginny, it's funny, you mentioned, or Tim mentioned earlier, that you're the voice of Tom Dorrance in the film, and so I keep waiting on words of wisdom to spout out. I can't wait to hear more of those as we get to know you a little bit better. So thank you for joining us today. It's been so nice to get to speak with you. And Tim, thank you for spending time with us too. It's a busy summer for everybody, and so every chance that we get to sit down and talk is a good one. So thank you both.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you again
We'll have
soon.
another talk soon, right?